12 soldiers, trapped on the upper floors, one bleeding out, and a ground floor full of bombs that no metal detector could find. Her unit had been banned from building clearance for 7 months. Too risky, they said. Not your lane. But there was no one else, so she went in. Just her and her dog, in the dark, no backup, no authorization. They made it through 11 devices. Then her dog stopped, not an alert, something different, something worse. Somewhere in that building, someone was watching, finger on the trigger, waiting. And the only thing standing between 12 lives in that moment was whether she trusted what her dog was trying to tell her. This is the story of Sergeant Claire Weston and her partner Titan. Claire Weston had a partner nobody took seriously. His name was Titan. He was a 6-year-old Belgian Malinois with amber eyes and a coat the color of wet sand. He weighed 61 pounds. He had a scar on his left shoulder from a fragment round that had ended his career as a patrol dog 4 years ago, and on cold mornings the shoulder stiffened, and he walked with a slight hitch on the front left, that the vet called residual, and Claire called earned. He was the best explosives detection dog she had ever worked with. He was also, according to most of the soldiers at Forward Operating Base Irwin, just a dog. That distinction mattered more than it should have. Fob Irwin sat on the western edge of al-Rashid, a city in northern Iraq that had been contested, cleared, recaptured, and cleared again enough times that the walls of its older buildings carried layers of damage, the way trees carry rings, each one a different year, a different fight. The base was mid-sized. Around 600 personnel. 2 Special Forces elements, an EOD team, a motor pool that smelled of diesel and brake dust, and 1 military working dog unit, which occupied a corner of the far eastern compound that everyone called the Pound. Its primary occupant, aside from Titan, was Sergeant Claire Weston, 31K, military working dog handler. She had been at Fob Irwin for 7 months. In that time, Titan had found 1 weapons cache, 2 pressure plate IEDs on a patrol route, and a buried ammunition store that 3 passes with a metal detector had missed entirely. He had done all of this without drama, without ceremony, and without receiving any credit that changed the way the chain of command thought about what he was capable of. Claire was 28 years old, 5'6", from a small town called Cooksville in southern Georgia, where the summers were brutal and the pines went on forever. She had brown hair she kept in a tight braid, a patient manner that people sometimes mistook for passivity, and a quality of attention, a particular focused stillness when she was reading an environment or reading a dog, that was unlike anything most people around her had ever developed. She had been reading dogs since she was old enough to walk behind her father. Warren Weston ran a working dog kennel outside Cooksville. Not a boarding kennel, a training operation. Law enforcement dogs, search and rescue dogs, detection dogs. He had clients across 3 states. He was not famous exactly, but he had a reputation in the working dog community as someone who understood animals at a level that went beyond technique. He used to say there are 2 kinds of handlessers, the ones who train dogs and the ones who listen to them. Only the second kind ever becomes truly good. Claire had grown up listening. By 10 years old, she could read a Malinois' alert posture at 40 yards. By 14, she understood the difference between a dog sniffing out of curiosity and a dog sniffing toward a source. By 17, she could run a training exercise from memory, handling the dog's line and reading its micro-expressions simultaneously, the way a musician sight reads and plays at the same time. She enlisted at 19. The recruiter put her in 31K without hesitation. It was, for once, the right call. She met Titan 2 years later at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, where military working dogs were trained and matched with handlers. Titan had been retired from patrol work 4 years earlier, following the fragment round that had clipped his shoulder. The vet had cleared him for return to service in a limited capacity, detection only, no bite work. The training staff had cycled through 3 handlers trying to repartner him. Titan was, in their assessment, difficult, willful, resistant to pairing with someone new. Claire spent 20 minutes with him in the exercise yard and came back inside and told the chief trainer she would take him. The trainer said, "He's washed out 2 handlers in 6 weeks. She said, "He hasn't washed out. He's been testing them. He doesn't trust easily." She looked at the yard where Titan was sitting, watching the door she had just come through. "He just needs to know you're worth following." The trainer said, "And you think you are?" She thought about her father in the kennel at 6 in the morning, moving among the dogs with quiet authority, not commanding but communicating. She said, "I think that's his call to make, not mine." She got Titan. It took 3 weeks for him to fully accept her. Not 3 weeks of work, exactly. 3 weeks of presence. She was there every morning before the other handlers arrived. She moved at his pace, not hers. She did not ask him for anything he was not ready to give. She let him set the terms, and when he finally, on a Tuesday morning, pressed his head briefly against her knee while she was reading his maintenance log, and then walked away like it had not happened, she understood that the negotiation was complete. He had decided she was worth following. From that point forward, they worked as a unit in the truest sense. Not handler and tool, not soldier and asset, something more reciprocal than either of those words allowed for. She read him the way her father had taught her to read dogs, and he, over time, learned to read her back. He knew when she was certain. He knew when she was uncertain. He knew from the tension in her shoulders and the pace of her breathing when a situation was normal and when it was not. This was not magic. It was not instinct exactly. It was 2 living things that had spent enough hours in the same space they had learned each other's language. The Army had a word for what Titan could do. They called it detection. They had forms for it, training certifications for it, a protocol for documenting it. What the Army did not have was a way to measure the full depth of what a truly trained dog and a truly skilled handler could accomplish together, because that depth was not reducible to a checklist, and things that are not reducible to a checklist make military bureaucracies uncomfortable. Master Sergeant Brian Kowalski was the kind of man who believed deeply in checklists. He was 47 from Chicago, built like a man who had spent 20 years carrying heavy equipment up difficult terrain. He had 2 combat tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, a meritorious service medal, and a command philosophy he had refined over 2 decades into something he considered both principled and precise. He ran FOB Irwin's ground operations with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had seen what happened when corners were cut and had decided, somewhere along the way, that the answer to that problem was to eliminate corners entirely. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had built a very specific model of how a combat support operation should function, and who defended that model with the conviction of someone who believes his experience has earned him the right to certainty. Claire did not fit cleanly into his model. The first time she met him, 2 days after arriving at FOB Irwin, he looked at her unit patch, looked at Titan, and said, "Support asset. You run perimeter sweeps and route clearance on designated paths. You do not enter structures with clearance teams. You do not operate ahead of EOD on building approaches. Do you understand the operational parameters?" She said, "Yes, Master Sergeant." Then she said, "I've done building clearance work with EOD in 3 previous deployments." He said, "I'm sure you have. And in those deployments, if the dog triggered a device, the handler was down and the clearance team had a casualty on their hands. Here, the dog is a support tool. Support tools have support roles. That's not a reflection on your capability. That's a reflection on how this base manages risk. It was a perfectly calibrated argument. It had the shape of policy rather than prejudice. It acknowledged her capability in the same sentence it limited her role, which made disagreement feel like ingratitude. She had heard variations of this argument before. It never got easier to sit with. She went back to her unit. She started doing what she always did in these situations, which was to be so reliably excellent at the role she was given that the limits of that role eventually became impossible to justify. She ran perimeter sweeps with Titan every morning at 0500. She documented every find, every alert, every instance in which his detection outperformed the mechanical alternatives. She kept records in a black notebook she had carried since Lackland, a habit she had gotten from her father, who said that memory was fallible but paper was not. She submitted the records through proper channels and received in return a series of polite acknowledgments that changed nothing. The first incident worth noting happened 6 weeks after her arrival. A clearance team prepping for a building sweep on Al-Rashid's northern quarter requested a dog team for pre-entry exterior sweep. Kowalski approved the exterior sweep and denied the request for Claire to enter the building with the team. She swept the approach. Titan identified 2 tripwires on the exterior that the team's Valon metal detectors had not flagged. Non-metallic wire. Monofilament, nearly invisible at ground level. The team's EOD tech, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, crouched in the dirt looking at the wire for a long moment. Then he looked up at Claire. He said, "That's twice in a month your dog found something my Valon missed." She said, "He's working the odor signature from the explosive compound, not the hardware. Non-metallic IEDs read the same as metallic to him." Webb said, "I know how detection dogs work, Sergeant." She said, "I know. I just mean he's not limited to what the equipment sees. He's reading what the equipment can't." Webb looked at her for a moment. He was 32, lean, with the permanently careful movements of a man who spent his working life around things that could kill him. He said, "Do you always talk about him like he's a colleague?" She said, "He is." Webb did not laugh at that. He said, "I'm going to put in a request to have your unit attached to my team for building clearance." Formally, she said. "Kowalski will deny it," he said, "probably. But let me try." Kowalski denied it inside of 12 hours. He called Webb into his office and explained, in terms measured and professional, that integration of dog teams into active building clearance operations violated established force protection protocols. That a dog in a confined, multi-room environment with an armed clearance team was an unpredictable variable that created liability on both sides, and that Webb's EOD team was trained and equipped for the mission they were assigned. He said this without raising his voice. He said it with the confidence of a man who had thought about the problem carefully and believed his answer was correct. Webb came back and told Claire what had been said. She listened. She went back to Titan. He was lying in the shade of the kennel overhang, watching a sparrow on the wire above, tracking it with the focused patience of an animal that has learned to wait without wasting energy on anticipation. She sat down beside him. He shifted slightly so that his shoulder was against her knee. She thought, "This is the 3rd base in 4 years. The argument changes slightly, but the answer is always the same." The second incident happened a month later and was less professional on Kowalski's part, though not dramatically so. There was a mission briefing for a compound clearance in Al-Rashid's southern district. 3 buildings, suspected weapons storage. Kowalski ran the briefing. When he got to Claire's unit, he said, "Dog team sweeps the approach road and the outer perimeter. Once clearance teams are in, the dog stays outside. A young soldier named Private First Class Darnell Hughes, 20 years old and recently arrived from Fort Benning, raised his hand and asked why the dog couldn't go inside if it could find things the detectors couldn't. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when someone has said something that everyone was already thinking. Kowalski said, because a dog handler in a building clearance operation creates a protection problem. The handler has to manage the dog and watch their own exposure simultaneously. That's 2 cognitive loads instead of 1. And if the dog goes down, the handler is compromised. Support assets support. Clearance assets clear. Hughes said, but what if the dog can find something the clearance asset can't? Kowalski said, then we deal with it at the point of contact, like we always have. Hughes did not push it, but Claire noticed a specialist named Jasmine Park, the unit's comms operator, writing something in her notebook. Park caught Claire's eye. She gave a small, precise nod that said, I'm writing it down. Claire had known people like Park in every unit she had served in. People who understood that documentation was a form of resistance. She was glad this unit had one. The 3rd incident was the one that came closest to costing lives. A month before the building mission, an EOD tech from Webb's team named Corporal Reeves was conducting a preliminary approach to a building on the northeast side of Al Rashid when a pressure plate under a loose tile caught his left foot. He had seen it half a second before his weight fully committed. He shifted enough, and the device detonated at the edge of his movement rather than the center. He lost 2 toes on the left foot and a good portion of his hearing in the left ear. He was alive. He was also no longer deployable. The building had been marked and cleared 2 days earlier by a different team using Valon equipment. The pressure plate was made of wood and plastic. No metal signature. Webb filed a report. He included in the report a specific line that read, a certified MWD detection team with access to the approach would have identified this device before personnel were in contact range. He sent the report to Kowalski. He copied the battalion S3. Kowalski's written response acknowledged the finding and noted that the incident was being reviewed as part of a broader assessment of clearance protocols. The response said nothing about dog teams. It said nothing about changing the approach procedure. Reeves went home with 8 toes and partial hearing. Claire read the report in her kennel. She sat with it for a long time. Titan was on his mat, watching her with the specific quality of attention he used when he sensed she was working through something difficult. He was not anxious. He was simply present, the way a good partner is present, offering nothing except the reminder that he was there. She said out loud to no one except him, I know. He put his head down on his paws and watched her. She went back to work. The mission that changed everything happened on a Wednesday morning in late October. A 12-person special operations team had entered a building in Al Rashid's Central Market District at 0200. The building was 3 stories, a former commercial warehouse converted to residential use, flagged in signals intelligence as a potential IED assembly point. The team was experienced. They had done this kind of entry dozens of times. The ground floor approach had been swept with Valon equipment. Clear, they went in. The device on the stairwell was not metallic. It was a pressure release mechanism, the kind that activates when weight is removed rather than when it is applied. Someone had stepped on the trigger plate going in, unknowingly, and the device waited, patient as a held breath, for the weight to lift. When the 3rd man off the stairwell on the 2nd floor landing shifted his foot to move forward, the circuit completed. The stairwell detonated. Not catastrophically. The device was not large enough to collapse the building, but the stairwell was the only structural access between floors. The explosion brought down a section of ceiling at the base of the stairs, filling the ground floor access with rubble that would take 40 minutes to clear even with equipment. The team was on the second and third floors, with one man down, a sergeant named Torres, who had taken shrapnel in his right leg and was bleeding through his field dressing at a rate that Webb, listening to the radio from the fob, assessed as roughly 90 minutes to critical loss. They were also not alone in the building. The signal's intelligence had been right about the IED assembly. What it had not fully captured was that the ground floor, the floor between the trapped team and the exit, had been prepared as a second defensive layer. Whoever had built this place had expected a raid. The ground floor was seeded. Webb got the full picture at 0322 and came to Kowalski's operations room with it. He laid it out clearly. 12 personnel trapped, second and third floors, 1 critical casualty, 90-minute window. Ground floor, unknown number of devices, non-metallic probable given the stairwell device. Valon equipment destroyed in the blast. Backup EOD kit was 40 minutes away and would still be limited to metal detection. He said, "We need Claire and Titan." Kowalski said, "What's the structural assessment on the ground floor? Is it weight-bearing?" Webb said, "It's solid." The blast was contained to the stairwell alcove. Kowalski said, "And if the dog alerts on a device in a confined interior space, what's the extraction protocol?" Webb said, "She marks it, roots around it, and keeps moving." Kowalski said, "And if there are 30 devices?" Webb said, "Then she marks 30. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. He looked at the map. He looked at the timeline. He said, "The backup kit is 40 minutes. Webb said, "Torres doesn't have 40 minutes. Another silence. This one lasted longer. Kowalski was not a man who made reckless decisions. He was also, when the calculation was clear enough, not a man who made cowardly ones. The calculation right now was very clear. He looked at Webb. He said, "Get Weston." Claire was already up. Park had called her radio 3 minutes earlier. She was in the operations room before Kowalski finished the sentence. He looked at her. He said, "Torres is critical, ground floor, unknown devices, probable non-metallic. Your job is to find them, mark them, and clear a path for the extraction team. You are not a combatant on this mission. You do not engage. You clear the path and you come out," she said. "Understood." He said, "And Sergeant." He stopped. He said, "If the dog can't continue at any point, you pull back. No heroics." She looked at him. She said, "With respect, Master Sergeant, Titan decides when he can't continue, not me." Kowalski held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Get moving." The building was 4 blocks from Fob Irwin. They moved through the pre-dawn streets in a vehicle, Claire and Titan in the back, Webb in the front, running comms. Titan was alert the whole ride, sitting upright, reading the air coming through the window. His shoulder was stiff in the cold. Claire had noticed it when she put his harness on, the slight hesitation when she lifted his left leg through the strap. She had looked at him. He had looked back at her. Neither of them made anything of it. They dismounted a block out and moved on foot. The building's exterior was ordinary, pale concrete walls, metal shutters on the lower windows, a front entrance of heavy wood that had been breached by the entry team's ram 2 hours ago and now stood half open at an angle. The street around it was empty. It was 4 in the morning. The city breathed slowly in the dark. Webb stopped at the entrance and said, "I'll be on your radio, anything you need." He looked at Titan. "Tell him I said thanks in advance," Claire said. "He doesn't understand English." Webb said he doesn't need to. Tell him anyway. She crouched down and put her hand briefly on Titan's side. He was warm, his breathing steady, his attention already directed toward the door. She said, soft, close to his ear, the German command that every serious working dog trainer used, clean and distinct, a word that didn't blur with everyday speech. Such. Titan moved. They went in. The ground floor of the building was approximately 12 meters by 20. It had been a warehouse once. The bones of that previous life were still visible in the concrete pillar supports running down the center, the steel bracket hooks still mounted on the walls, the high ceiling that the residential conversion had dropped with a suspended grid of metal and drywall. The space was divided now into rooms, 3 of them, connected by open doorways without doors. The light was almost nothing. Claire had a headlamp on a low red setting. Red light preserved night vision and reduced signature from the windows. Titan worked in darkness as easily as he worked in daylight. His nose was not dependent on what his eyes could see. She unclipped his leash. This was the part that people outside the working dog world never fully understood. A detection dog working a complex interior space was not directed at specific points. You did not say search here or search there. You gave a work command, you let the dog set the pattern, and you read what the dog found. Claire's job in this building was not to lead Titan. It was to follow him intelligently. He was not fast. That was the first thing people expected, and the first thing that was wrong. A detection dog working for explosive odor moved methodically, covering ground in a systematic pattern, nose working continuously, quartering the air. Titan moved along the right wall of the first room, head low, a slow scanning movement that covered floor level and shelf level simultaneously. Claire moved with him, 3 steps behind, watching his body. Working dogs speak with their entire body. Tail carriage, ear angle, the way the neck changes from relaxed to focused, the specific quality of the breathing when the nose is tracking a diluted source versus a concentrated one. Titan had a particular alert he had settled into over 5 years of detection work. When he found a source, he would stop, orient his nose precisely toward it, and lower his head by approximately 10 degrees. Passive alert. No pawing, no barking, just that precise orientation and that specific stillness. Claire had learned to read it in darkness, in fog, in noise, and in silence. In the first room, Titan alerted twice. The first alert was near the far wall, low. Claire crouched and examined the floor with her lamp, following the angle of his nose. A pressure plate, wooden frame, roughly the size of a paperback book, set flush with the concrete under a thin layer of dust that someone had carefully replaced over it. She marked it with a glow stick, orange placed to the side of the device rather than on top. Titan watched her mark it. He did not move forward until she gave the command again. The second alert was at the doorway to the second room, not on the floor, higher. Titan's nose tracking upward at a 45-degree angle toward the upper left of the doorframe. She ran her lamp along the frame slowly. There. A wire, dark, nearly invisible against the dark metal of the bracket it was anchored to. She followed it with her eyes without touching it. It ran right, through a hole in the drywall, and terminated somewhere inside the wall. Tripwire trigger. She marked the wire with red tape at the anchor point and at the tension point, enough to make it visible to anyone coming through after her. She said, into her radio, 2 found, room 1 clear. Moving to room 2. Webb's voice came back, copy that, Torres is conscious, holding on. She moved through the doorway, stepping carefully over the marked wire, and entered the second room. The second room had been someone's living space. A mattress on the floor, a low table, shelving units along the far wall still holding cans and folded clothing. The domesticity of it was strange against the task at hand. Someone had slept here. Someone had folded that laundry. Titan quartered the space without urgency, working the grid, and in the second room he alerted 3 times. 2 pressure plates, and a tilt switch, a mercury tube mounted to the underside of the table that would complete its circuit the moment anyone moved the furniture. Claire marked all three. She noted the positions in her black notebook, chest pocket, writing by feel and lamplight, because documentation was something she had always done, and because some part of her understood that what happened in this building would need to be explained to people who were not in it. She said into the radio, 5 found. Room 2 clear. She gave Titan the command again, and they moved through the doorway into room 3. The third room was the passage room, the space that connected to the blocked stairwell alcove, to the rubble where the ceiling had come down. Beyond the rubble, the trapped team. She could hear them now, not voices, the sounds of people in a contained space, movement, a low instruction from somewhere above. Titan moved into the room. He found the first pressure plate near the left wall and alerted immediately. Then a second, 4 feet to the right, near a pillar. The devices were arranged to force anyone crossing the room to the center corridor, where they would have been channeled into the tripwire Claire found strung at ankle height between 2 support pillars. She marked them one by one, working with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done the same precise action so many times it has become a form of breathing. 2 more devices near the far wall. 7 found. 8. And then Titan stepped on something that was not a device. In the cold of the building, the ceiling debris from the stairwell blast had scattered across the floor in the direction of the draft. Fragments of concrete, metal bracket pieces, and a shard of glazed ceramic tile, edge up, half hidden under a film of dust, positioned by nobody and by nothing except physics and gravity. Titan's front right paw came down on the edge of it. He made no sound. That was the thing about Malinois. They did not cry out from pain the way a person would. His body registered it, compensated, and continued, the way a working dog continues, because the work was not done and the work was why he was there. But Claire saw it. She saw the fractional shift in his weight, the way his right front leg came up slightly. As he moved forward, the gait altered by a small but unmistakable degree. She stopped. She crouched down and put her hand on the floor in front of him, and he stopped and let her look. She turned the lamp on his paw, a cut. The edge of the ceramic had opened the pad on the inside of the right front foot, not deep, not arterial, but bleeding, steady and dark, leaving small prints on the concrete as he stood. Kowalski's words were in her head. If the dog can't continue, you pull back. She looked at Titan. He was looking at the room ahead. His nose was working. His ears were forward. The cut hurt. She could see it in the slight elevation of his paw when he stood still, the way he shifted his weight without thinking. But his attention was on the room. Not on the pain, on the work. She put her hand flat on the floor in front of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. It was a conversation she conducted entirely without words, the way the most important conversations between them always were. She said, low, such. He moved. He moved with the same systematic quartering as before, the same methodical nose work, the only difference being the slight unevenness in his step on the right front that he adjusted for without pausing. The cut left a trail behind him. Small red marks on the gray concrete, marking where he had been the way the glow sticks marked what he had found. Room 3 gave up 3 more devices, 10 found, 11. And then at the far end of the room, 5 meters from the rubble of the stairwell, Titan stopped. Not an alert. Something different. Claire had been working with him long enough to know the distinction immediately. An alert was an orientation, a precision, a nose pointed at a source. This was something else entirely. He had gone completely still, weight distributed evenly, head level, not orienting toward anything. He was simply not moving. And the hair along the ridge of his back had risen slightly. She stopped 3 steps behind him. She had seen this posture once before, in a training exercise at Fort Campbell, and her instructor had said at the time, when a detection dog freezes like that, not an alert but a freeze, it means something in the environment has changed that the dog has registered before the handler has. Wait. Read the space. Don't move until you understand what changed. She read the space. The room was dark. The light was almost nothing. The glow sticks behind her cast faint orange and red across the floor. Ahead of her was the rubble of the collapsed stairwell, the ceiling debris scattered across the concrete, the void where the stairs had been. Above, somewhere, 12 people were waiting. And then she saw it. On the far wall, to the right of the rubble, at approximately shoulder height, a thin wire running from a small box, roughly the size of a pack of playing cards, mounted to a bracket hook on the wall. The wire ran along the wall and disappeared through a hole into the adjacent room. Not a pressure plate, not a tripwire, a command-detonated device. The kind someone triggered remotely, which meant somewhere in this building or close to it, someone was watching, waiting for movement. She did not move. She understood the geometry instantly. She was 5 meters from the device. The wire on the wall was not the trigger. It was the receiver circuit. The trigger was in someone's hand. Whoever was watching had waited through all the time she had been in this building, through all the glow sticks and the marked plates and the tripwires, waiting for the moment when the team tried to clear the rubble. Waiting for the moment when 12 people would be crowded into this room, moving fast, focused on the exit. That was when they intended to fire. Claire put her hand on Titan's back. She pressed gently, the signal they had built together over 4 years, the one that meant stay exactly here, stay exactly still. He lowered himself slightly, chest toward the floor, weight settled, and did not move. She reached for her radio. She set it to 1 click. 1 click on the push-to-talk meant I am here, I am okay, do not respond. She clicked it once. A pause. Webb clicked back twice, received. She stayed still. Titan stayed still. 40 seconds. 60. She counted in her head, slow and even, the way her father had taught to count in a kennel when a dog was nervous, because a calm count meant a calm body, and a calm body meant a calm dog. She breathed through her nose. Her heart rate was elevated but not panicked. Panic was a luxury she did not have. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. The cold in the building was significant. She could feel it in the air. She could feel it in the way Titan's shoulder was tightening against her palm, the stiffness working deeper as he held the still position in the cold air. The old wound, the earned scar. She could feel him working to hold the position steady against the discomfort of the shoulder and the pain of the cut paw, and she could feel him doing it without complaint because the work was not done. 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then Titan moved. Not much, just a shift, a fractional relaxation, the tension going out of his back and shoulders the way tension goes out of a body when it registers that a threat has changed or passed. He looked at her. She looked at him. She had learned in 4 years to trust this signal more than almost anything else. He was telling her something had shifted. The watcher was gone, or had looked away, or had decided the moment was not right. She did not know which. It did not matter. She moved forward. Slowly, she kept her body low and her movements smooth, nothing sudden, nothing that looked like urgency. She reached the device on the wall and examined it thoroughly with her lamp. Receiver wire, circuit box. She marked it with every marker she had. Red tape, orange tape. 2 glow sticks. A notation in her black notebook with the exact position and the circuit description, so that Webb would have everything he needed to neutralize it without having to read the geometry cold. She stepped back and looked at what was behind her. Glow sticks across 3 rooms, a constellation of orange and red, a mapped language of where the danger was and how to move past it. The path was not wide. In places it was barely shoulder width. but it was clear and it was documented and it was navigable. She said into her radio, 12 devices found and marked, 11 static, 1 command detonated on the far wall, receiver circuit intact, marked for EOD, ground floor path is viable, send your team. Webb's voice came back fast. Copy, moving now. She put her hand on Titan's side. He was breathing normally. Working hard but controlled, his attention still on the room even though the search was complete, scanning for anything he might have missed. He was thorough that way. He did not declare a space clear and disengage. He stayed watchful. She scratched behind his ear. He leaned into it briefly. Then he straightened and looked at the door. They waited. The extraction team was 4 people, moving in single file, stepping exactly in the marked path. They came through the rooms like men walking a tightrope, deliberate, eyes on the glow sticks, following the route Claire and Titan had made. The first man through was Webb. He moved through the rooms without speaking, reading the markers, and at the far end of room 3, he stopped beside Claire and looked at the 12 marked devices and was quiet for a moment. He said, "All primarily non-metallic?" She said, "Non-metallic triggers on all the static devices, some compound construction. The commanded on the wall is intact. I left the circuit live for you." Webb looked at the device. He looked at the markings. He said there was an observer. She said, "Yes." He said, "How long were you still?" She said, 3 minutes. Approximately. He looked at her. He said, 3 minutes. She said, "Titan told me when it was clear to move." Webb held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned to the device on the wall and went to work. He was efficient and precise, the way all good EOD techs were efficient and precise. And he neutralized the command-detonated device in under 2 minutes, while Claire stood with Titan at the far end of the room and watched and understood again why working in your lane mattered and why her lane and Webb's lane and Titan's lane were all necessary, and none of them were sufficient on their own. Webb nodded. She called the path clear. The extraction took another 40 minutes. The rubble was cleared by hand, passed back down the line, enough moved to create a passage. Torres came down first, carried on a litter, conscious, pale, one hand gripping the rail with a determination that came from somewhere below conscious decision. The rest of the team followed, one by one, stepping through the rooms in the marked path, each of them looking at the glow sticks and the devices as they passed. None of them spoke until they were outside. Torres was loaded into the medevac vehicle with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this before and do not want to think about how many times. As the vehicle moved, one of the team members, a tall sergeant named Ellery, stopped beside Claire at the building entrance. He looked at Titan. He looked at the wrapped paw. He looked back at Claire. He said he walked through 12 IEDs on a cut paw. She said, yes. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, I thought the handler bond thing was just something handlers said, something for the recruiting brochure. She said, no. Ellery looked at the building one more time. He said, Jesus, he actually led you through all of that. She said, I followed him. They walked back to the vehicles in the cold pre-dawn, and the city around them was still dark, and the building behind them held its constellation of orange and red markers in the dark like a map of all the ways something could go wrong and didn't. The debrief happened at 0800. Claire sat in the operations room with Webb and Kowalski and Captain Whitmore, the task force intelligence officer, who had come from battalion headquarters. Torres had reached the surgical unit. He was stable and expected to recover. The debrief was systematic and thorough. Claire walked through the building room by room, marking each device on the facade, floor plan, identifying trigger mechanism, noting positions. When she finished the marked floor 12, the plan showed what Whitmore described as a deliberate defensive preparation designed to prevent exploitation by a security force conducting an organized clearance, a professional institution. Someone had planned this carefully. Kowalski said 12 devices, primarily non-metallic triggers, full ground floor coverage, including a command-detonated device with an active observer. Claire said, "Yes, Master Sergeant." He said, "With the dog." She said, "With Titan." He said, "Time to clear and mark." She said, 22 minutes to clear and mark 11 devices, plus approximately 3 minutes of holding on the command while the observer was active. Webb said the holding was the right call. If she had moved while the observer was watching, the circuit was live and the timing was exactly what they were waiting for. Kowalski was quiet. He looked at the floor plan. He said, "And without the dog?" She said, "Without Titan, you would have needed to probe every square foot by hand, assuming no tripwires went undetected. Minimum 2 hours in that space. In 2 hours, Torres would have been critical." Whitmore said, "The secondary question is Valon reliance. If the stairwell device was non-metallic and the ground floor was primarily non-metallic, the pre-entry sweep protocol needs review." Kowalski said, "Yes, it does." Whitmore looked at Claire. He said, "Your unit found 12 devices that standard equipment would have missed or taken 2 hours to locate. And your dog identified a command-detonated device with an active observer through behavioral response alone, before any human in that room had registered the threat." He stopped. "I want your unit's operational assessment in writing. What MWD integration with clearance teams looks like, what the protocols need to be. I want it at 1400, she said. "Yes, sir." Whitmore said, "One more thing, Sergeant. I will be forwarding a formal commendation recommendation to battalion for you, and I'll make sure Titan's performance is specifically documented in the recommendation as a matter of record." She said, "Yes, sir." She went back to her kennel. Titan was on his mat, the wrapped paw extended in front of him. Binam examines precisely the way a dog examines something attached to itself. The base vet had already been by, cleaned and properly dressed the cut, and declared him off duty for 48 hours pending review of the wound. She sat down at her desk. She thought about Reeves, with his 8 toes and his partial hearing, and the report that had gone nowhere. She thought about 3 bases and 4 years, and the argument that never quite changed. She thought about 12 glow sticks in the dark. She opened her laptop and began to write. The operational assessment she submitted to Whitmore at 1350 was 14 pages. It covered the technical case for MWD integration in building clearance operations, the specific limitations of metal detection equipment against non-metallic devices, the training and certification requirements for handlers working in confined spaces, and a proposed protocol for integrating dog teams into active clearance without creating the force protection problems Kowalski had consistently cited. She was precise. She was factual. She used the incident reports from the previous 7 months, the documented finds, Reeves's injury, the stairwell detonation, the ground floor clearance. She let the numbers make the argument. She did not use the word unfair. She did not use the word discriminated. She laid out what had happened and what could have been different and what needed to change. Whitmore read it twice. He forwarded it to the battalion commander with a cover note. Kowalski received a copy. He read it in his office, alone, and sat with it for longer than he would have admitted. He was a man who had built his protocols on the best information available to him at the time he built them. He had not been wrong to be cautious. He had been wrong to be certain. There was a difference, and the difference was Reeves's toes and Torres's blood and 12 glow sticks in the dark on a ground floor that his protocol would have walked 12 people into. He came to the kennel at 1600. Claire was at her bench doing maintenance on a piece of kit. Titan was on his mat, watching from across the room with the alert, reading attention he used on people he did not fully trust yet. Kowalski stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came in and sat down across from her. He said, "I read your assessment." She said, "Yes, Master Sergeant." He said, "You drafted it from scratch in 5 hours." She said, "I had the framework in my head. The incidents gave me the data." He said, "You kept records of all of them." She said, "Yes." He was quiet. He looked at Titan. Titan looked back at him steadily. Kowalski said, "In my experience with dog teams in building clearance, I've seen handlers split their attention between the dog and their own exposure, and it's gotten people hurt." She said, "That's a valid concern with undertrained handler-dog teams. It's not a valid concern with a team that's been working together for 4 years in the same discipline." He said, "I know the distinction." He stopped. "I may have applied the general rule where I should have applied specific judgment." That was a hard thing for him to say. She could see the cost of it. She said, "I know your concern was for the force. I didn't take it as personal." He said, "It was partly personal." He looked at Titan again. "I'm not good at recognizing capability I don't have a metric for. If I can't measure it on a checklist, I tend to discount it. That's a problem when the capability doesn't fit a checklist." She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "The assessment is a start. The protocol will need work. There are legitimate force protection considerations that I've tried to address, but there will be things I've missed." He said, "I'll mark it up and send it back. We'll work through it together." She said, "I'd appreciate that." He stood. He looked at Titan one more time. He said, "The dog. How does he know? He's detecting the compound." She said, "The base chemical components. Concentrations too low for any instrument we currently field. He also detects odor displacement around a device, the way a buried object disturbs the surrounding air chemistry. He's been trained on over 40 compound types." She looked at Titan. "But the real answer is that he knows because he's been doing this for 6 years and he trusts his nose. And I know because I've been watching him work for 4 years, and I trust it too," Kowalski said, and the freeze. On the command, he knew something was wrong. She said, "Something changed in the room. He felt it before I could read it. You learn what a partner's signals mean over time. There isn't a faster way." Kowalski thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "The protocol recommendation. I'm going to support it at battalion level." She said, "Thank you, Master Sergeant." He left. Claire sat with that for a moment. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something quieter. The particular feeling of a thing that has been wrong for a long time beginning slowly to be less wrong. Titan got up from his mat, walked across the kennel on his 3 good paws and the wrapped one, and pressed his head against her knee. He did not make anything of it. He just stood there for a moment, the way he always did when he had decided she needed the company. She put her hand on his back. She said quietly, I know you know." The protocol was formalized over the following 3 weeks. It required back and forth between Claire, Webb, Kowalski, and the battalion's EOD officer. There were arguments about confined space procedures and handler exposure limits and the specific scenarios in which a dog team would and would not be appropriate for interior clearance work. There were concessions on both sides. The final document was not everything Claire had proposed and was more than she had been permitted to do for 7 months. It was a beginning. Beginnings were enough. Torres came back from the surgical unit 8 weeks later. He walked with the cane and would walk with one for another month before the physical therapy caught up with the damage. He came to the kennel on his 2nd day back. He came alone, which surprised Claire until she saw his face, the expression of someone who had been thinking about something for a long time and had decided to say it directly. He said, "I want to thank you," she said. "I was doing my job." He said, "You were doing a job you'd been told not to do." He looked at Titan. "If you'd followed the protocol, I'd be in a different kind of trouble right now," she said. "The protocol was based on incomplete information." He said, "It was based on a decision somebody made about what you were capable of." He stopped. "I'm glad they were wrong," she said. "Titan was right. I just followed him." Torres looked at Titan. Titan looked back at him with the mild, attentive gaze of an animal that has done its work and expects nothing further. Torres crouched down slowly, carefully with the cane, and looked at Titan at eye level for a moment. He looked at the front right paw, healed now, the fur grown back cleanly over the closed cut. He said, "I heard he kept working after he was hurt." Claire said, "Yes." Torres said, "On a cut paw, in the dark, in a room with a live command and an active observer, he stopped, and you stayed still for 3 minutes because he told you to." She said, "Yes." He thought about that for a moment. He said, "I know handlers say the bond is real." He paused. "I used to think it was a figure of speech." She said, "I know." Torres left. Titan watched him go. Then he turned back to his mat and lay down with the slow economy of an animal that conserves what it has and does not waste it on ceremony. Park came to the kennel that evening. She brought 2 cups of bad coffee and sat down across from Claire and said, "I've been keeping records." Claire said, "I know." Park said, 7 months' worth. Every denied request, every incident where the dog found something the equipment missed, Reeves's report, the mission debrief, all of it. Claire said, "Are you going to do something with it?" Park said, "I already did." She looked at her coffee cup. "I submitted a formal documentation package to the Inspector General's office, a record of tactical decisions that resulted in preventable casualties and a pattern of protocol failures that a review board needs to see." She paused, not a complaint. "A record. The difference matters," Claire said. "The difference matters a lot." She stopped. "That's exactly right, Park." Park said, "I learned it from watching you. You never argued. You just kept the records and kept working." Claire said, "My father told me once that you can't out-arg a system that isn't listening. But you can out-document it. Keep everything factual. Wait for the moment the facts get loud enough that the system has to hear them." Park said, "Your dad sounds like someone who understood how institutions work." Claire said, "No. He trained dogs his whole life." She glanced at Titan. Same lesson, different classroom. They sat in the quiet of the kennel, the bass making its regular sounds outside, and Titan slept on his mat in the unhurried way of an animal that has done what it came to do and has no argument with the world. Claire looked at him. She thought about the first time she met him, in the exercise yard at Lackland, the way he had tested her without apology, setting his own terms, deciding for himself whether she was worth following. The 3 weeks before he trusted her. The Tuesday morning when he pressed his head against her knee and walked away like it had not happened. She thought about the building in the dark. 12 glow sticks, 22 minutes plus 3 minutes of absolute stillness in the cold, with his paw bleeding and his shoulder aching and his nose still working. He had not stopped. Not because she had ordered him to continue, not because protocol required it. He had not stopped because the work was not done, because she was there, because somewhere in the accumulated hours of 4 years, he had decided she was worth following and had not changed his mind since. That was the whole of it. You build trust in the ordinary days, in the work that nobody sees. And when the day arrives that requires everything, it turns out that the trust is the thing that carries you through it. There is a photograph on the wall of the military working dog training facility at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. It was extracted from the helmet cam footage of the extraction team, recorded at approximately 04:15 on a Wednesday morning in late October, as they moved through the cleared rooms following the path of glow sticks. The image shows the interior of a ground floor, low red light, and two figures from behind moving through a room. In the foreground, a woman in full kit with a headlamp on red, 3 steps back, her body angled forward in the posture of someone reading what she sees rather than directing it. In front of her, a Belgian Malinois, lean and alert, nose working, moving along the right wall with the systematic, unhurried precision of an animal entirely focused on its work. Between the two figures and the camera, the glow sticks mark the floor in orange and red. If you look closely at the concrete behind the dog, you can see the small dark marks his cut paw left as he worked. Beneath the photograph, a plaque reads, Sergeant Claire Weston and Military Working Dog Titan, Fob Irwin Al-Rashid, Iraq. 12 devices located and marked, ground floor clearance, 22 minutes. 1 command detonated device identified and reported. 12 personnel extracted without additional casualties. MOS at time of operation, 31K, Military Working Dog Handler. People who walk through that entryway on their first day of MWD training stop and look at it. They go quiet. They look at the dog for a long time before they look at the handler. That's usually the right order. The light in the entryway falls across the image of Titan moving through the dark room, nose down, working towards something invisible, moving with the certainty of an animal that trusts what it knows and has a partner who trusts it back. And somewhere in a city in northern Iraq, 12 people are alive who would not have been alive if someone had decided, at the right moment, to listen to what a dog was trying to say. The dog knew where the danger was. Someone believed him. That was enough.